All right. So good evening and thank you for joining us for our second lecture in our Revisiting Public Health in Massachusetts virtual series, which is supported in part by a grant from the Tewksbury Cultural Council, a local agency which is supported by the Massachusetts Cultural Council, a state agency. My name is Ashlyn Rickard-Werner and I'm a member of the Board of Directors. As like many museums and nonprofit organizations, in light of COVID-19, we have shifted our programming online and as a positive side effect, have been able to bring a wider array of programming and events to a broader public, which we're thrilled about. For those of you who are not familiar with the museum and have not been able to visit, I just want to take the opportunity to give you a brief background about America's first public health museum. The museum is a nonprofit organization located on the campus of the Tewksbury Hospital in a National Historic Building built in 1894. We have a wide collection of historic public health artifacts and documents that are exhibited in 6 rooms of the historic Old Administration Building. Exhibits cover topics such as infectious diseases, such as smallpox, tuberculosis, and polio, mental health, nursing, dental, and much more. The museum's mission is to celebrate the history and achievements of public health. Oh, sorry, going a slides ahead here. The museum's mission is to celebrate the history and achievements of public health and to preserve the past, inspire future practitioners, educate the public, and advance the future of public health through partnerships with academic institutions. Please visit our website, www.publichealthmuseum.org, for our visiting hours, events, and exhibits that we have on display. I also want to bring your attention to our upcoming events. The first is our museum extravaganza, which is our book signing event, which our book Tewksbury State Hospital was just released, or will actually officially being released Monday, May 24th. So you can pick up your copy at the June 5th event, or you can order it online through Amazon, but the museum will have copies available for sale as well. And you can also sign up for tours for our indoor and outdoor walking tour for the campus, all happening June 5th between 10 and 2. Our other event coming up is on June 8th at 7 p.m., which is also a virtual event, which is the Tuskegee Racism, Healthcare Access, and Vaccine Hesitancy with a wonderful speaker lineup. So it'll be a moderated session. So we look forward to hopefully hosting you for that as well. And then our walking tours of campus are available. So in addition to June 5th, we usually have walking tours available on the first Saturday of the month. So we'll love for you to join us on those, and you can book online via our website. So now I want to take a minute to introduce our speaker tonight, Henry Lucas from the Spelman Museum of Stamps and Postal History. Henry is the Education Director at the Spelman Museum at Regis College in Weston since 2004. He's a retired high school social studies teacher, an assistant principal at Cambridge Ridge and Latin School, and a principal for 17 years at the Marblehead, Manchester, and Canton High Schools. He also has served as a gallery guide of the Museum of Fine Arts and the Harvard Museum of Natural History, and is past president of the board of the Friends of Fairstead, the National Historic Site in Brookline, the home and office of Frederick Law Olmsted. For over 25 years, he was a member of the board of the Boston Children's Theater and served as president several times. He founded the statewide high school Massachusetts Academic Decathlon in 1984 and served as its state's director for over 25 years. He is a founding member of the CRLS Alumni Association, and during the spring and autumn after his retirement, he's led historic tours of the Boston area. So Henry, welcome. Thank you so much for participating with us. And before I let you take over with your slides, I just wanted to note to everyone that throughout the presentation, feel free to drop questions in the chat feature, and then we will address those at the end. And we will let you get started here, Henry. I will let you have, bear with us a second as we transition slides.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you tonight. I have not been to your museum, and I don't know if anybody I saw at least one familiar name, two familiar names that have been to our museum, but I certainly hope that my presentation tonight will encourage you to visit us. Right now, we're hoping to open right after July 4th, and we'll be open Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So please check out our website. We'll have more information. But my program tonight is a new one for me. I've been doing a lot of programs on the history of the post office and the history of stamps, but this is my first time kind of connecting medicine with stamps. So I'm learning, and I did enjoy preparing this program because I've learned an awful lot. I hope some of you will pick up some good information too. And I do have a little quiz for you I like to give to people. At the end of my program, I'm going to tell you all the Henrys that have appeared on US postage stamps. So if you're sitting there with a piece of paper and a Henry pops into your head, just write it down. With the one notice that the US Post Office has an official policy, they only put dead people on stamps. So no living Henrys on stamps, just bad. And I'll give you the answers at the end. And we also have a free monthly calendar that I prepare that connects the date of the month with a stamp, an event or birth of a person. So it looks a little like this, and we can email it to you free of charge. And for example, yesterday was the anniversary of the first Kentucky Derby, and we have a stamp celebrating the Derby. So if you're interested in history and want to learn about events, send us an email. I'll be happy to send you the calendar. Ashlyn mentioned a little history of her museum. I should mention we are located in Weston, Massachusetts, about 10 miles outside of Boston on the Regis College campus. And the name of it's called the Spelman Museum, and it's named after Cardinal Spelman, who was a big stamp collector and who started the museum. We incorporated, I believe, in 1960, and then we opened on Cardinal Spelman's birthday on 1963. It was a big celebration. There were over 1,000 people there, including the Postmaster General. So it's one of only 2 stamp museums in the country. So if you visit us and then you go down to Washington, D.C. and visit the Smithsonian, you will be in 100% of all the stamp museums in the country. The Cardinal was born right here in Massachusetts, down in Whitman, Massachusetts, went to Fordham University. Then he went to Rome to study to be a priest. Here's a picture of the seminarians, and that's where he picked up the stamp collecting habit. So he came back and put his collection together, became well known in the stamp collecting world, and then he decided, with the help of a lot of his friends, to set up the museum at Regis College. And of course, he was a very important person in the Catholic Church, became a cardinal right after World War II. And some of you, longtime Massachusetts people, may certainly remember that name. We have a Cardinal Spelman High School. So he's well known around the world. So, all right, 2 things about stamps that I think you need to know. One, postage stamps have only been around since 1840. Some people say, well, what about the Stamp Act? Well, that wasn't a stamp. 1840, the British Post Office decides to change their system. The system originally was when you sent the letter to somebody, you didn't have to pay, the person getting the letter paid. And if you can think about that, that wasn't a very good system. So in 1840, this man, Mr. Hill, who's featured on this stamp, decided to take a little piece of paper, put the picture of Queen Victoria on the front, put some glue on the back, sell it real cheaply, use it to mail a letter anywhere in Great Britain, and that was the birth of postage stamps. That's 1840. It took a little while for the United States to get stamps. We didn't start our first postage stamps till 1847. But now every country in the world has stamps, and there are thousands and thousands of, of stamp collectors, and it's a great hobby. Kids these days aren't doing as much as people my age did stamp collecting, but if you have kids or grandkids, come on up to the museum and we'll try to get them hooked on stamp collecting. All right, so today's program is a kind of a salute to all the nurses and doctors and medical researchers over the years who have helped to keep us healthy. These stamps, what I'm going to basically do is talk a little bit about the topic on the stamp and then explain a little bit the actual image. For example, the stamp on the left here came out at the 100th anniversary of the American Medical Association. Many stamps that are issued celebrate anniversaries of organizations. It's also collecting stamps related to medicine, I found out, is quite a big hobby. This is the cover of a web page from the medical philately. Philately, by the way, if you're not familiar with that word, is a fancy word for stamp collecting. And if you're a stamp collector, you're a philatelist. So there's nothing wrong with being a philatelist. We like to say stamp collector better than that. I also like collecting stamps because I'm a trivia buff. And so when I come across a stamp, and it brings up another topic, in preparing for tonight, I learned that one of our presidents, one of our shortest term president, only served a few months, William Henry Harrison, really wanted to be a doctor. And back in 1791, he went to school in Philadelphia, but he didn't have the fortune to study, so he became a general in the army instead and got elected in 1840. And if you know the story, he was elected in March of 1840 and died just a few months later. Another little piece of trivia, he's on a 9-cent stamp. And the reason he's on a 9-cent stamp is because he was our 9th president. There's a whole series of presidents on stamps. The denomination is the same as their number. Another little piece of trivia, Dr. Charles Drew, and now we're connected right into medical area, an African-American surgeon. He to research blood transfusion and a way of storing blood, which was very important to saving many thousands of lives in World War II. The reason I include him here, not only because of medicine, but he also worked for the post office at one time, along with another other celebrities. But he also was involved, I found out, with a little interesting part of our history, our segregated history. He was asked to head up the American Red Cross blood bank since he had worked on all the plasma work. And in 1941, a few months before we got into World War I, but he was told that the African Americans' plasma would not be used. And so he resigned from that. He did get the Army to slightly change its policy, but blood would still have to be sorted separately of blacks and whites. And another coincidence today, it happens to be Johns Hopkins' birthday today. As you can see, unfortunately, my screen is being blocked up above, so I can't quite read my titles. But he was born on this day, and he got his money. Basically, he started out. He was a Quaker. He started out with a business with several, I think, 2 other brothers, and they started getting moonshine that they were using as payment. And so he made a lot of money on his Hopkins Best. And so he invested it in the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, which you can see is stamped there, one of the first railroads in our country, made his money. He died in 1873, leaving equivalent today of about $134 million. So he, as a philanthropist, he gave his money to set up a hospital and a school of medicine. And this is considered one of the founding institutions of modern America. And I think everybody in America knows about the John Hopkins connection. But he also, after he had died and they set up the hospital, he was helped by several other physicians, one of them being this gentleman here, William Osler. He created the first residency program for special training at John Hopkins. And then another gentleman helped him out, William Stewart Halston, also came in on the faculty and worked on various things, anesthesia and several other new operations, including a breast cancer operation. You're going to have a little geography information as we go through these stamps. You may see some stamps of countries you haven't heard of, such as this one, Transkei. It's no longer a country. It's now part of South Africa. But for a number of years, it was a separate country and then got joined up with South Africa. COVID, couldn't do a program on stamps and medicine without mentioning COVID. A number of countries, quite a few actually, have issued stamps recognizing the pandemic. And you can see a few here. 2 that I found interesting. One, the red one up top is from Helvetia. And if you're not familiar with that country, that's really Switzerland. They don't say Switzerland because they speak 4 languages in Switzerland. As you can see on the stamp, there are 4 different words for solidarity. And so that stamp, and then the one below is a little humorous stamp from Austria. They made a limited amount, and this stamp here, that's not the whole stamp, just the right part is the stamp. It's made out of toilet paper. There's a little connection with COVID. These are a few more countries that issued with different symbols for COVID. I like the one on the left. The gentleman is working for the post office, but you can see he has you can kind of see a shield, protective mask type thing that he's wearing. So they were recognizing the service of postal workers even during that. And the one I like best actually is on the right from Spain. It's a thank you to all the medical people who have been working in the Spanish hospitals. The one down below is from the Polynesian islands, and it's two women wearing masks. And speaking of essential workers, you know the slogan, the unofficial motto of the post office, neither snow nor rain nor heat. Well, we've added the pandemic. I know the post office has been criticized for some slow delivery lately, but they stayed up and delivered mail entirely during the pandemic. So if you have anybody who is connected to the post office, we need to thank them. World Health Day comes around every year, and a number of countries issue stamps to celebrate that. This year's World Health Day's theme, as you can see, is Together for a Fairer, Healthier World. I found a number of stamps that celebrate different hospitals. The one up there is the U.S., just honoring public hospitals in general. Apollo Hospitals, I understand, is a rather large hospital conglomerate throughout of India. And then the one below, the double stamp, is from this Safdarjung Hospital, which is a multi-special hospital, one of the largest in the central government of India, and it's located right in New Delhi. So again, stamps are a way of honoring various institutions that have been very helpful. Just a little more geography lesson. Kenya's honoring their hospital there. This is St. Martha's Hospital in Bangalore in India. And if you've never heard of Tristan da Cunha, it's way down in the South Atlantic, almost near where you go over into the Pacific Ocean. And then the Falkland Islands, you may be more familiar with. There's a bunch of stamps featuring their hospitals. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Tokelau. It's in the South Pacific, about a 24-hour boat ride from Samoa. But you can see their hospital. The one on the right, I think you know that's the stamps honoring the Royal College of Surgeons in Dublin, which was founded back in 1784 for healthcare education. And today it's one of the world-leading health science universities and training bodies in Ireland. Stamps can be used to raise money for medical issues. And these stamps are called semi-postal stamps, which means you pay for the cost of postage, but then you pay an additional money that money goes to the research that you're giving the money to. A number of stamps have come out from the United States. The most famous one, and the one that's still used and has raised over, I understand, $100 million, is the breast cancer stamp. Came out, I believe, in 1998, and they keep thinking about discontinuing it, and then there's a demand to keep it. So you can still buy those stamps at the post office, and you'll be paying 55 cents, which is what it costs to mail a letter now, plus an additional few cents. But Alzheimer's and post-traumatic stress syndrome also have been used to raise money. This one on the left from New Zealand is rather an early one, that was to raise money for tuberculosis, and this other one here also for tuberculosis. And people often ask us at the museum, how do you get on a stamp? Or who decides what a stamp should be celebrating? Well, you write a letter to the post office, and there's a committee of about 15 people that meet 4 times a year and they look over all the proposals, and they get about anywhere from 20 to 30,000 proposals for suggestions. So, but this one I found is from a group that wants to have a special stamp to raise money for childhood cancer. And they just found out that step number 1, they've been accepted as a very potential for having a stamp. It takes about 3 years from start to finish to get a stamp issued. So we won't see anything like this stamp, at least for another 2 years or so. This I found was the very first stamp to be used to raise money for cancer research, and it's in Sweden, and it's a little unusual because the whole postage went to the Jubilee Clinic, which is in Stockholm, at the hospital there. And so the money from this, King Gustav was a big supporter of the hospital, and so he agreed that the post office wouldn't get any money; it would all go to the hospital for their research. And then there are other awareness days and weeks. This one is celebrating Cancer Awareness Day, which takes place, as you can see, I think in February. I like this stamp. It's from what used to be called the Yugoslavia, which is now broken down into different countries. But it's cancer, the crab cancer, fighting cancer. The Croatian language on the side just translates into fight cancer. So again, one of the reasons I like to collect stamps and is just the artistic work and how creative people can be in putting images on stamps. And then the post office has done other recognitions of research for cancer. And this other breast cancer stamp came out. That's not a semi-postal, but it was just an awareness stamp. And they've also issued a stamp alerting people to prostate cancer. So again, stamps can be used. We might call it propaganda in a positive way, but it's a way of, again, millions of stamps are printed and millions of letters are mailed. Then we have nursing has been recognized. We just missed National Nursing Week. I don't know if you did anything up at the hospital there, Ashlyn, but a number of countries have recognized stamps, nurses on stamps. Interestingly, the one on the left is a Canadian stamp. Canada has 2 official languages, so very often there are 2 languages on their stamp, as you can see. The quote for health guards the nation, and then it's also in French. Florence Nightingale, we're all familiar with. This is a German stamp. And so her quote, translated up above, is live life when you have it. Life is a splendid gift. There is nothing small about it. So, and she, this is an interesting stamp that came out, a younger Florence Nightingale. And then again, countries around the world recognize people. And this stamp is from Costa Rica, celebrating the Red Cross, Florence Nightingale's portrait, and then a woman there called Edith Cavell. And I'll tell you about her in a minute and why she's on this stamp. The Red Cross has been recognized for the Nobel Peace Prize several times, both during World War I and World War II for all its humanitarian activities. And then in '63, it was recognized along with the Red Crescent Society. The Red Crescent Society is the Muslim branch of the Red Cross. And you can see this on a stamp from Monaco, and then a Turkish stamp with the flag. And then they've joined a day, May 8th is a day to celebrate both of those organizations. Back to Edith Cavell. The stamp in the lower right is not a stamp, it's what we call a poster stamp, which means people collect these. They're like postage stamps, but you don't use them for mailing letters at all, just the work. But anyway, Edith Cavell was helping soldiers leave from Belgium during World War I to get out of German-occupied Belgium, and she helped a number, but she was captured, and then she was executed by the Germans. They didn't, Canada didn't, Britain hasn't done a stamp for her, but I found there's a mountain in way out in the Jasper National Park out in Alberta, province of Alberta, and they named a mountain for her. I think it's the tallest mountain in Alberta. And then there are other nurses who have been made famous in their own countries. This is from Finland. She decided to go into nursing after she divorced, and she's called the Florence Nightingale of Finland and organized the nurses for that. And this woman is interesting, Mary Breckenridge. She's American. She's responsible for developing nursing service in rural communities, especially delivery of children, but in all areas. And she set up a series of rural hospitals and visiting homes to help the poor in these Appalachian areas and stuff. Interestingly, her grandfather was the vice president when James Buchanan was president. And then after the war, she volunteered to go to France. And again, this is not a postage stamp. This is the poster stamp, as I mentioned. And she worked in France for 3 years organizing disaster relief, and she was recognized by the French government for her humanitarian work. Then there's another nurse, Phoebe Pender from in the South. She ran the big hospital, the largest hospital in the country at the time, in Richmond, Virginia, during the Civil War. And she ran that hospital up until age 39, serving thousands and thousands of patients. And the name of the hospital was Chimborazo. Well, that sparked my curiosity. Doesn't sound like a name you would find in Virginia. It turns out it's the name of a volcano in Ecuador. And there's a stamp showing the volcano. And it turns out it got its name from somebody who was in Virginia around the early 1800s and saw this hill. Richmond, like Rome, claims to have 7 hills. And there was this little hill with some smoke coming out from a furnace that was built on the side. And anyway, somebody said it reminded them of Chimborazo, and the name stuck. So, but again, you can learn all these kind of things from the stamps. And then a woman named Dorothea Dix, another familiar name, coming out of the Civil War, where she was in charge of Army nurses. But then after that, she was a major leader in helping the mentally ill and changing our views about those with mental illness. And then I think a woman, most people now are familiar with Elizabeth Blackwell. She was the first woman to receive a medical degree in the United States. She actually was from England, but she went to school here in New York at Geneva College, which I think is now Hobart College. And then she went back. She was told to go to Europe because the education of doctors was much more progressive, especially in France. So she stayed over there. She had a eye disease that blinded her a little later, and so she couldn't become a surgeon. But she did open a medical college just for women in England. I mentioned stamps celebrate anniversaries. So Canada is issuing a stamp discovered in 1921 insulin at the University of Toronto. And so they're celebrating that wonderful, and that was done by 2 doctors, both honored on stamps, one from Canada, Dr. Banting, and one from Transkei, that country. I will also say that some countries issue a lot of stamps that never get used to mail letters. They're made for stamp collectors, but they still are legitimate stamps and everything. I know I have a lot of writing on some of these slides, so I'm not expecting you to speed read through these. I'll try to explain what's on them. But insulin is a popular topic on stamps, and you can see a number of countries there. Again, Switzerland down in the lower left. And again, if you're an artist, or to take a subject and put it on a small piece of paper is a challenge. Drawing a big stamp, big picture is a lot easier than making a small one. Then we have Dr. Fleming, another name very important in medical history. And he was the discoverer of penicillin, leading to a lot of antibiotics. And I don't know what we would do without antibiotics today. He's recognized by the Republic of the Congo. And he's also been recognized in a number of other countries. Mauritius, if you're not familiar with that, it's an island country, used to be controlled by the British out in the Indian Ocean. And Moldova rather, in north of Greece. And Magyar is Hungary. You see a stamp that says Magyar, you can see it in there. They actually have the formula for penicillin. Again, from a little piece of paper, you can learn a little chemistry. Kind of interesting. And I thought these 2 stamps were interesting. Usually we put people on stamps. Here they put the penicillin through a microscope. And I also should point out a little stamp knowledge over on the left. That stamp is from Great Britain, but it doesn't say Great Britain or United Kingdom. That's because England was the first country to have stamps, they don't have to put their names on their stamps. Every other country has to put its name on, except, but they do, if you notice up in the corner, the left-hand corner is Queen Elizabeth. So the silhouette of the king or the queen is always put on the British stamps. Polio, obviously, is, we're so happy that there's no more polio almost in the entire world. And 2 people to be highly commended for that are Dr. Salk, Jonas Salk over on the left, and Mr. Albert Sabine on the right, both of them recognized on stamp. I myself, I'm old enough to be a polio pioneer. When I was in elementary school, I received I understand later on it was a placebo. We were being tested and I still have my polio pioneer card. Maybe I should donate that to the museum there for you. And of course, polio has been eradicated. Dr. Salk went on to study research against AIDS, and he died at the age of 80 in 1994. Dr. Sabin, I believe, died a few years later. This named gentleman, Percy Julian, very important chemist in helping, these are words that I'm not too familiar with, but he is synthesizing human hormones and others, making advancements in medicine. And then we have two gentlemen, the Mayo brothers, Dr. Will and Dr. Charlie. Back in the 1880s, they wanted to become specialists in surgery, so they set up their clinic. And as you know, the Mayo Clinic is one of the top research and hospitals in the world. And just a few statistics there on the screen: 4,500 physicians and scientists, 58,000 administrative and health staff, and not only located in Minnesota, but also Jacksonville, Florida, and also in Arizona, and with a big budget for research. And this stamp came out, again, you can tell how old the stamp is by the denomination. This is a 5-cent stamp, and I think you can read it came out in 1964. The envelope is what we call a first day cover. It's like a birth certificate for a stamp. It's issued, in this case, it was issued in Rochester, I think. And there's a big ceremony for a stamp when it comes out, and they put a special cancellation called the first day cancellation. And then usually the envelopes have some kind of picture on the left-hand side, which we call the cachet. Okay, let's get into some famous names in medicine. Of course, everybody knows the Hippocratic oath. This is a Hippocrates back in 460. He appears on two more Greek stamps, and of course the Hippocratic oath that was still taken. The major thing is do no harm, if my understanding of that is correct. And as it says here, one of the earliest expressions of medical ethics in the Western world, still carried on today. Now that raised the question of the symbol that we use for medicine. And as I was researching this a little bit, I noticed some stamps had a stick with 2 snakes on it, and some had a stick with 1 snake on it. And so different organizations use the symbol. The one with the 2 snakes is not as popular anymore. It originated from, this is Mercury or Hermes, who supposedly threw a rod at 2 snakes to stop them from fighting, and the symbol was born. But most people use the staff of Asclepios, the one snake rather than 2. And I tried to figure out what is with snakes and medicine, but it turns out in ancient Greece, snakes were often used in healing rituals. You might see a bunch of snakes on the ground or on the floor. So these symbols, again, are used worldwide. As you can see, different stamps all appearing with them. By the way, the one stamp in the middle is a country that doesn't exist anymore, Czechoslovakia. And then I just thought, for stamping view, who was the first doctor to actually appear on a postage stamp? And it turns out it's this fellow, Francesco Espio from Ecuador. Again, Ecuador we have here. And he was a scientist and a doctor, as well as a person who inspired some separatism and independence. And then the second doctor to appear on a stamp is a Dutch, again, not just a doctor, but a botanist, a chemist, a humanist, and founder of clinical teaching in modern academic hospitals, the father of physiology. So he gets honored by two Dutch stamps. Again, a name I was never familiar with. And this name I did not know, but it was a very important gentleman about washing hands, which is the major thing we do today in every hospital, especially with COVID going on. But he studied why he was concerned about why so many children were dying in the hospitals. And it was called puerpero, which is childbed. They were put to bed and they would die. And he figured out because babies that were born at home with midwives were not suffering the same fate. of death. And he put the two together and figured out it was just germs. And so he encouraged washing hands in the birth room, and this cut down on the number of children who died. So we have to give him a lot of credit for that. This gentleman, Dr. Crawford, doesn't get as much credit. He was the first to use anesthesia when he removed the tumor. Now, I've always thought that the first anesthesia operation was in Mass General in the rotunda there. But this Dr. Crawford gets the credit for using ether, and then it was followed up by a number of other people. I think ether was also called laughing gas at the time. And then Dr. Albert Schweitzer, a name we know, a gentleman who gave his life to help people in Africa, especially in a country called Gabon, establishing hospitals all around Africa and public health measures. And he received the Nobel Peace Prize in '52. But he wasn't just a doctor. He was what we call he's honored by the way, in many countries for all his humanitarian work. But he was also what we call a polymath. He was skilled in a lot of different areas, and he was well known for playing the organ. And so two stamps that honor him, one from Rwanda in Africa, and then again, here's Magyar, the Hungarian stamp. And interesting that they used a part of his life on the stamp to recognize him more than just being a doctor. Then we get into the yellow fever area, which was in Cuba. Dr. Carlos Findlay researching that. And then, of course, we'll learn about Clara Moss in a minute. And then Dr. Reed. Dr. Findlay is very honored in Cuba. This is a stamp that came out honoring his 50th anniversary of his death. And then I think Clara Moss, you may be familiar with. She was an Army nurse in Florida, Cuba, Philippines. I think she may have gone to Panama as well. She volunteered during the Spanish-American War to determine what was causing this yellow fever. And Dr. Gorgas, who worked in the Panama area, they discovered that it was the mosquito. She was willing to get sick the first time, and she survived, but the second time she did not, and she's honored for her dedication in giving her life to study that. And then, of course, over in Panama, Dr. Gorgas honored on a number of postage stamps. And then smallpox, I have to mention smallpox, which is basically, according to the World Health Organization, has been eradicated. And these are some stamps celebrating that. Although I did learn, actually from Turner Classic Movies, back in 1947, there was a fear of a smallpox breakout in New York City, and 6 million people were inoculated within 30 days. When you think about that. So this is an interesting little tool used in a post office. It's from the Postal Museum down in Washington, D.C. at the Smithsonian, but it was used to aerate letters for fear there might be germs in them. And so this would perforate the letters and hopefully get rid of the germ, somewhat similar to the anthrax scare we had here a few years ago. And then Dr. Jenner, who gets credit for the word vaccine. He's recognized for the smallpox, treating of smallpox with that. Again, you can see the British stamp with Queen Elizabeth. And leprosy, another disease that has a cure. And we have to thank Dr. Hansen from Norway, who discovered the bacterium that causes leprosy, which is also sometimes called Hansen's disease. And he was able to, leprosy didn't become that terrible disease where you had to isolate people. But people did get isolated, and this gentleman, Father Damien from Belgium, went over to the leper colonies in Hawaii and took care of the lepers until his death. And he's such a hero, there's even a statewide holiday for him in Hawaii, and the church is considering making him a possible a saint. He's the patron saint right now of the Diocese of Honolulu. Leprosy Day is still recognized, again, because people still do get leprosy, and so it's recognized. And for some reason, they chose the anniversary of Gandhi's death as the day to celebrate it. And then malaria, another disease carried by mosquitoes, recognized on many stamps. And it's still, as you can see some of the statistics here. 229 million cases, 409,000 people have died in the Africa. So curing malaria is still a necessary thing. Measles, another plague, which we've been pretty much eliminated here in the United States, but it's still a problem in a number of other countries. And it was declared eliminated in the United States, but travel can still do it. And then typhoid fever, another recognized disease, which for a long time was not known what was causing it. But this Dr. Brentano was credited with discovering that, and I won't spend time on that. Tuberculosis, you all familiar with the Christmas seals? They were started raising money in Denmark to raise money for the Tuberculosis Association. And then a woman named Emily Bissell, a nurse who was in a small sanatorium in Delaware, United States. They needed to raise money. She heard about the idea in Denmark, and so she came up with a special little Christmas seal stamp that was endorsed by Teddy Roosevelt, and we still use them today. So, and then finally, Dr. Koch announced that he had discovered the cause of tuberculosis, which then led to helping the cure. And this man here, Dr. Waxman, discovered the compound that acted against tuberculosis called streptomycin. So again, not a name I don't know. We certainly know about streptomycin. Lady I like, Virginia Apgar, you know, the Apgar test. When a baby is born, they test it for 5 different things: heart rate, muscle tone, other signs to see. And it's on a scale of 1 to 10. And if a baby is scoring 7 or higher, it's been a very successful, healthy baby delivered. And so she was responsible for developing this way of checking on babies. And she was a little bit of a polymath too. She played the violin and did instrument making. And we like her because she was a stamp collector. Found that out. And before she died, she started taking flying lessons, and her goal was to fly under the George Washington Bridge in New York, which I don't think she ever did. Heart health is an important subject on stamps. There's a few stamps advocating taking care of your heart. And this one here, one from Nepal and the Himalayas, and talking these. And then the United States did issue a stamp a few years ago urging people to take care of their heart, a rather lovely stamp. And then hypertension, this is again a Hungarian stamp. Hypertonia is the Hungarian word for hypertension. And there's just the use of the EKG on a stamp design. And then the heart transplant, you have to talk about medicine on stamps. You have to talk about Dr. Christian Bernard down in South Africa. He's a cardiac surgeon, the first human-to-human heart transplant of a 54-year-old gentleman who survived, what does it say, 18 days after the operation. Anyway, so he's obviously recognized on a lot of stamps. And then donating blood, one of the most important things people can do. Many countries have issued urging people to give blood. You can see the United States stamp there on the left, a French stamp. I think that's a Bulgarian stamp. Kenya, you've already seen that stamp, and Suomi from Finland. So again, stamps can be used to send messages to the country of good causes. I found this stamp, interestingly, they're rare diseases. There's a rare disease, anything under 200,000 people, there's less research done on it. But these folks in North Macedonia are trying to get more support to recognize research for rare diseases. And this stamp came out to commemorate a rare disease, Alport syndrome, which I must admit I did not research. And then we have to tie in dentistry with medicine on stamps. So we have a bunch of stamps here celebrating dentistry from around. There's another little tiny country there on the left, Pitcairn Islands, if you're familiar with that. If you're familiar with the mutiny on the Bounty, that's where the mutinous sailors set up on Pitcairn. Again, a very small country, but they issue thousands of stamps for stamp collectors. And this gentleman here is known as the father of dentistry in France. And he urged a very, very simple thing to people in France, and that was to keep your teeth clean, wash your mouth every morning with water and rub your teeth with a wet sponge. And so he urged people to clean their mouth and stated that toothbrushes use a sponge instead of a cloth, because cloth was too rough, wear it on the teeth. So anyway, so there's the name of dentistry. Ask, next time you're in the dentist office, ask them if they know about Pierre Fauchard. So, and a couple of stamps celebrating brushing your teeth. All right, time is up, but as I did the research for this program, I've left out a lot of people on stamps. Louis Pasteur, Pierre and Marie Curie, and all their work in radiation. Joseph Lister, Dr. Mary Walker, who was a Civil War nurse. Paul Dudley White is a name you're familiar with. So hopefully this has kind of sparked your interest in people on stamps. There are several books out listing all sorts of doctors who are recognized and on stamps. So, but now here's the answer to my quiz, and then I'll ask when we can get to questions. These are all the Henrys that I found that are on postage stamps. I don't know many of these, but Henry Dunant was the founder of the Red Cross, and he's on a number of stamps. And I didn't know this, Lou Gehrig, and we're all familiar with Lou Gehrig's disease. Lou Gehrig's first name actually was Henry. I just learned that checking on stamps for this program tonight. So anyway, that's it. And so I thank you for watching, and we'll open up for questions. No medical questions, however. I'm not curing any diseases. Okay,
Thank you.
Ashley, you want to start?
Yeah, thank you so much, Henry. That was fantastic. Wow, I hadn't seen all of his slides beforehand, and you tied in everything I feel like we have in the museum and everything we have ever had a presentation about. So I think that covers it. So thank you very much for that. Wonderful.
I noticed you do. I noticed you do have an iron lung in the museum, right?
We do. We do have an iron lung.
A picture of an iron lung.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. We do have an iron lung.
Questions?
Yeah, so is there, okay, let's see if we have any in here right now. We do have some questions. Who is responsible for the design and art on U.S. stamps?
Oh, we do get that question asked a lot. The post office actually has a number of artists that they call on to design stamps. And as I said, it takes about 3 years from the time they decide we're going to do this subject to actually getting it designed. What size do we want the stamp? Is it horizontal? Is it vertical? Maybe it should be a triangle. But they do not usually go out and ask people to send in designs. They pick an artist and then tell them, this is what we want. And so there are a number of men, mostly men, who are professional artists and graphic designers, and then are called. So we have a whole list of artists, stamp designers at the museum, and you'll see some of them have done quite a few stamps. So it's kind of a small cadre of stamp designers. Unusual for somebody who's not in that area to design a stamp.
Very good to know. Thank you. And we had a question from Frank. Any tips on how to get young folks interested in stamp collecting?
Well, that's getting harder and harder. You and I communicated entirely by email for this program. There's just when I was a kid, obviously a lot more letters. Mail was sometimes even delivered twice a day, especially around Christmas time. There were more stamp albums. We try. We have Boy Scout groups. We have Girl Scout groups. I go out to schools. We have family days. But we found there's just too many other things that kids are doing to get into stamps. So we're trying as hard as we can, and but it's not easy. The other difficulty is, if you remember, you used to be able to soak a stamp off an envelope. So you get an envelope, you cut the stamp, put it in some water, and then now with the self-adhesive, they don't come off the paper, so they're not quite as attractive to collect. So But kids, when they come to the museum, they always take home stamps with them. The other thing we do at the museum is we teach them how to address an envelope, which you'll be surprised many children do not know how to do. They don't even know, we give them an old stamp and tell them to stick it on the envelope, and they don't know what to do because they're used to self-adhesive stamps. So they look at us and say, well, how does it stick? And we tell them, well, you have to lick it, which generates some ugh sometimes. And that. So, but parents, again, the parents' age didn't collect stamps, so it's even harder to get that to kids. But we're trying, and we do get kids to the museum. So, and we do have a kids club where we send kids packets of stamps every month. Next question, is there one?
Yeah, there's a few more. So we all have stamps lying around in our homes. So what makes a stamp valuable? So we know when we go look.
Well, chances are you don't have a valuable stamp. One reason is most American stamps, millions are made, especially in 1950s and 60s. They may have made 300, 400 million stamps. So there's plenty of them out there. What makes a stamp rare is several things, is how many are there, but that's not the only reason, what condition it's in, and a little bit of its history. There's a very famous stamp of an inverted, it's called the inverted Jenny. It's an upside down airplane on a stamp. There's 100 of them, but they sell, one just sold for $1 million. Now there are other stamps, there are only 2 or 3 of them, and they don't sell for nearly as much. So some of it is just a popularity. Some people like to be, there is one stamp, there's only one of them in the world, and actually it's going up on auction in a few weeks. You'll probably hear about it in the news. It's from British Guiana, and it's going to sell for 10 or 12 million dollars. Wow. But if you think any stamp after 1930 tends not to have much value, but stamps around the turn of the century, they can have value, and we do get people who come in with collections. The trouble is, with fewer people buying stamps, it's harder for you to sell your stamps. But if you have a collection, we'd be happy to do an evaluation for you. So just a small fee, and information is on our website.
Great. Thank you. Susan had a question. Susan used to donate stamps to a person who would make collage art projects. Have you heard of any type of art like that where they're collaging stamps?
Yeah, there's some veterans hospitals that do that. There's Boys Town out in Nebraska that collects stamps for that. So there are some missionary people who collect stamps. We've been asked this question before, and I really need to get a list of places that will accept stamps like that. I know veterans hospitals do, but obviously, like anything else, you can find it on the internet. But we do those. Of course, we're willing to take stamps too for our education program. So if you have stamps and wish to donate them, we're more than happy to accept them.
That's great. And Gail asked,
by the way, I have just got 600 Elvis Presley stamps. So if anybody wants to come to the museum and do an Elvis Presley collage, we'd be happy to help them. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's okay. It sounds pretty good. Gail had a question. How do collectors place adhesive stamps today in an album?
That's the problem I was mentioning. That's another problem why kids don't collect stamps, because very often you have to buy a whole sheet to display it. If you can soak them off an envelope with a special, like a cleaning fluid. But the question was, what? How do you exhibit them? Usually you have to keep them on the paper and do it a very nice trim along the edge to feature it. But a unused one, most of them have some kind of paper on the back to protect them. When the self-adhesive stamps came in, stamp collectors were not happy.
Let's see. It was a bummer for Gail. And Arlene said she found the 5-cent Dr. Mayo stamp in her collection. That's fantastic. You got your own little public health collection.
That was in the early 60s, and so again, they were making millions and millions of them. Yeah.
So I think those were our last questions, unless anyone else has anything else they would like to drop in the chat. I know that one other question we had in the beginning was, is this recorded? So this is indeed recorded. So we will have this available either later tonight or tomorrow. So if you registered via Eventbrite through the museum, the Public Health Museum, you will get a follow-up email with the link to watch the recording on YouTube. And I will share that also with Henry. So anyone who's signed up through the Spelman Museum, you'll get that sent out to you as well through their museum. Let's just see if we have any other.
I would say, I know we advertise this program in our museum newsletter. So if there's anybody out there from the museum, a member of the museum who gets the newsletter, if they could just email me that they attended tonight, I would appreciate that.
Absolutely. Great. I think that is all we had for questions. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Thank you for all that will probably watch this on YouTube later. And thank you so much, Henry. That was phenomenal, and I could listen to that over and over again. It was so great, and hopefully we'll be able to collaborate and do this again in the future.
I'd be happy to come out to the museum sometime and do a live presentation with different stamps. So, but I really enjoyed doing the research on this, and I learned quite a lot. So I benefited from it. Thank you.
Thank you all so much, and have a great evening. We look forward to seeing you at some future Public Health Museum events, and I'm sure Henry would appreciate seeing you at the Spelman Museum for a tour as well. So thank you all, and have a great evening.
Thank you, and send a letter to a friend, please.
Absolutely.
Okay,
send a letter. All right. Bye all.